Thanks everyone for coming. I hope you found a place to park your ark. Start looking for some wood and two of every animal. It really is quite an honor and a pleasure to be here with you for reasons that will become apparent in just a little bit. But now I get the do I get the opportunity to introduce you, John? Sure. Come on up, my man.
Who in this side?
You've got to reach up to hug him now.
Yeah. Oh, he's gonna reach down. Hey, thanks for coming. My name is John Sykes, and how do I get the honor to introduce Steve? I'm a New Bedford product. I went right through New Bedford Public Schools, taught high school, New Bedford High School for 30-something years. The early 80s, I had the opportunity to work at the Upward Bound program. I was hired by Ruby Dott, who was an icon in this city, in this area. The Upward Bound program is a program for qualified area students to have a college experience during the summer, to live in the dorms over at, then it was Southeastern Massachusetts University. Live in the dorms, have academics in the morning, tutoring in the afternoon at night. And Steve was one of our kids. My role was teaching, tutoring, and running a drama component. Then I got a call, a life-changing call on December the 28th, 1983. And that date's important, right between Christmas and New Year's. And the call was from a gentleman named Mike Sylvia, who worked social services. I happened to be manning the phones when he called. And he told me that he had a client, one of our students, Steve, who needed an emergency placement. He had been found that his living conditions at the time were unhealthy. Indeed they were, if you've seen the film or read the book. He needed a place to put Steve because he couldn't find a placement for him during the holiday season. I don't know what happened here. Here's the mystery for me. Steve and I have talked about it. I immediately said, yes, I'll take him. I let him stay with me. I still don't know how that happened. Divine intervention, I don't know. I have never regretted that decision. Ever, not for a second. I've regretted a lot of things in my life. That's not one of them. That's for another page. She's beautiful. So he showed up. Mike Sylvia showed up, pickup truck. And all of Steve's belongings were in the back of that pickup truck. And I distinctly remember a garbage bag, a green ripped garbage bag that held everything he had. And he remembers books too, but I remember the garbage bag. The garbage bag was not worthy the cold garbage. You would have put this ripped garbage bag in another garbage bag to throw it away. It was that bad. And he was smiling. He was happy. So we went to my place in Westport, and if you saw the film, the place that the film is a lot more domestic than what I had, because I'm a single guy. I'm living in Westport. It's Christmas vacation. I'm ready to go to town here. Plans change, and I'm glad they did. So we spent the night. We worked up a little hammock kind of deal. And the next day we would change one of the bedrooms over, make it his, at least for the 2 weeks he was going to stay with me. Remember, this was going to be a temporary situation. And it was going to be fun, going to be experimenting. A couple of guys. The 2 weeks, became a year, and a year became a permanent foster placement, and I became a permanent foster parent. Thank you. The qualities I remember in Steve and know in Steve. Now remember, he did not have a solid family life where he had examples. These came from Steve, and he made these choices. First one is integrity. Let me give you an example of his integrity. While I was teaching, he had an assignment to do a speech, 2-minute minimum 2 minutes, on Romeo and Juliet. Let's see what happened. And he gave the speech, and it was beautiful. It was great. It was the best speech, except he was 2 seconds short. 1 minute, 58 seconds. And it was so good, I was going to let him slide on the 2 seconds, and he turned me down. He said, no, I didn't make the 2 minutes. I'm going to take the grade that I got. That's impressive. Next situation is his focus. I can put his focus in 3 areas. First, he never gave up the search to find out who he is, who his parents are. Always in the back of his mind. But he also knew that education was the way to get to where he wanted to be. And so he knew he wanted to go to college. Remember the ripped garbage bag. You don't go to college on a ripped garbage bag unless you have that focus. And so he ran cross country, and he ran it well. Now about academics, he had a lot of honors courses, and we talked a lot about getting advanced placement. Now advanced placement, for those of you who don't know, are the highest level courses you can take in high school. Indeed, if you can pass those and pass the national test, you skip the courses, 101 courses we call them, in college. But we looked at AP, Advanced Placement English, and a little doubt, he had never gone that route. We looked at the syllabus and looked at the books they were requiring. He'd already read them. He didn't know they were even on it, and he read them already. So when he made the transfer over to Advanced Placement, it was natural, and so was everything else. His dedication to excellence has always been apparent, from the cross country to the academics, to being accepted at Boston College, to being on the board of trustees at Boston College. Remember the ripped garbage bag. Remember this. As the campaign unfolds and as you talk with them more and more, you're going to find out the details of this stuff. But when you combine those 3 with humor, I'll leave with this: instant mashed potatoes, chicken croquettes, which are no longer made, mercifully, a plumbing experiment I may never tell you about, learning how to drive, some lady at a stop sign I will never tell you. It's all innocent. It just when you mix the humor and a muscle shirt I had no business wearing that he did. I will tell you about that one, but not today. Gratitude. If you can eat chicken croquettes, instant mashed potatoes, and still be grateful for what you've got, you are blessed with gratitude. And humility. 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 We might need that in Washington. He has these. All of these things means he listens. To this day, he is a son to me. His children have always known me as Grandpa John. Steve, you'll never be on your own. I was thinking about that last night. Crazy.
I've been thinking a lot about it too. Oh, I didn't know that he was, going to go to that level of detail, though I should tell you that one thing he did not tell you is that when I was trying to figure out how in the world I was going to pay for Boston College, I told him that I had no way that I could actually afford that. And he said, you should apply for scholarships. And I said, what's that? And he said, that's free money. I knew what that was. And so he sent me on this assignment. He said, why don't you bring home this book of scholarships? And so I did, and I'm flipping through it. And I'll confess that we both have mischievous personalities. That mischievousness led me to apply for a scholarship for left-handers, though I am not left-handed. And he sees me doing this, he says, you're not left-handed. I said, I know, but I'm willing to be. I'm willing to be. And he sees what I'm doing, and he says, well, let me see. I showed him the book, and he circled a scholarship, and as soon as I looked at it, I said, I've got no shot at that scholarship. He says, no, I think you should apply. I said, no. It clearly says, Daughters of the American Revolution. I have no shot at that scholarship. But he made me apply. And, you know, when you're a teenager, you always want to be right. Right? And so I turned out to be right because they absolutely rejected me. I showed him the rejection letter, and he said, that's not right. I think we should write them back. And I said, and say what? He said, ask them if they're sure. So this day, I'm amazed that I actually wrote Daughters of the American Revolution back, asked them if they were sure about their scholarship. And they wrote me back when I protested their decision and said, you know, not only are we sure of our decision, but we're actually really, really sure. So I was told no a lot, but I was told yes, just enough. But I want to tell you a story about what brings me to this time and place, a most unlikely journey. Although I have to tell you, looking at this room and who's in it, I can tell you that it's a lot more about the people in this room and around me. That has a lot more to do with how I have arrived here. I was born and raised right here in New Bedford, not too far from here on Lincoln Street, to a mother who was in the middle of a losing battle with alcoholism, the distant figure of a father who, though I did not know him at the time, would ultimately be lost to gun violence. When I was a toddler, a friend of my mother's was often tasked with picking me up and bringing me to a place where my mother had made an arrangement, is so disturbed by the very difficult circumstance that I am in. But that particular morning I'm crying, and I don't want to leave my mother. There's some part of me that knows that this may be one of the times that she does not come back. And he's so disturbed by what he sees that he says, this little boy doesn't have a chance in the world. About a year and a half after that, I was taken from her, just a couple of weeks before Christmas. And I was to never see her again, although I always wondered about her and my father, where they were. What unfolded thereafter was the journey of a biracial foster child who society doesn't know what to do with you. You can tell that in the way that people look at you, whether their smile reaches their eyes. I still remember talking with a social worker who I asked, why is it so hard to find me a family? And she says, because we don't know if you belong with a white family or a black family. In my naivete as a young dad, as a youngster, I thought that she was referring to the color of the house. I had no concept of color. And I still remember thinking, well, why does it matter if the house is black or white or purple or orange? If there's a real mother and a real father in there, then that would be home for me. But that never really unfolded. It's just a hard truth. The opposite of that would unfold. Unstable, abusive, and oftentimes incredibly violent homes that I would have to navigate for the next 13 years, just struggling to be seen, to be heard. So every day was a fight. Every day was a fight. I have no memory of a day when it wasn't a fight to be seen, a fight to be heard, a fight to be seen not through the lens of circumstance over which I had no say, but through the lens of possibility that I thought I had a right to. And the truth of the matter is that all these years later, the fight never really leaves you. You still have the fight. There's no title you can ever have that ever takes the fight away from you. And it's that fight that you also recognize in others in glances. And in moments of interaction, you see their fight too, because you recognize in their fight the fight that you once had. Oftentimes I was sent off on errands, including going over to the Star store here, because that's where you paid your utility bill. And the foster family often sent me on that mission. And I would always prolong the mission, and I did that for one reason, so I could escape to the place that was my sanctuary, and that was the New Bedford Public Library. There was peace there. It was quiet. Nobody asked me if I belonged. Nobody asked me what I was. Nobody asked me whether or not I had a reason, specific reason for being there. Nobody actually judged me. And in that place, I could read, I could learn without threat. I could do the things that I saw a lot of my friends in elementary school actually do. It was that place. And it was there really that I dreamed of a better life and a new beginning and a different possibility. But despite those dreams, I still lived in the world of the unseen and the forgotten and the overlooked. I've never forgotten that. I'll never forget it. Some things that you live, you can't unlive, you can't unsee them. They're with you. And the question for you is, what are you going to do to get through them? What will you do? So for a time, it just seemed that this prediction of not a chance in the world was going to come to pass. Sometimes pain does get moved from one generation to another. And in reality, it should have turned out that way. It should have. But it didn't. And the reason it did was because of these people who I came to call human lighthouses. If you think about what a lighthouse is, it guides, it protects the journey of the traveler, especially in storms. Well, as individuals, as human beings, we're lighthouses too. And that's what they were to me. The first lighthouse I encountered was Claire Levin, this wonderful neighbor who used to bring me books. Most days of my childhood, I never saw her, but I saw the books that she would often leave on the front steps of that foster home. Many years later, I would meet her and I'd ask her, so why'd you do that? Because you could have kept walking. And she said, well, I was doing something my mother told me to do. Give from where you are with whatever you have. She didn't realize until many, many years later that those books that she brought me would be the very books that I would bring to John's home many, many years later, because it was the gift, an extraordinary gift. John mentioned Marjorie Ruby Doughton, who's so beautifully named, will always be a Ruby to me, who I first met as a spelling bee judge. And I remembered her in the 5th grade simply because of the way that she looked at me. Because when Ruby looked at you through that lens of possibility and strength and courage, you had no choice but to live up to it. She has a lot to do with why I'm here. And John, who you met earlier, I think about our bond, our connection, our relationship. We come seemingly at first glance from different paths and different walks, but there's a kinship there. There is a connection there. There will always be a connection there. The older I get, the more in awe I am of that selflessness that he showed on that day, particularly at a time in our society when so many walk by difficulty. That's not their problem. That's not their concern. But that's not what he did. He stood in the gap for me. When you put all those things together, born into a deficit that was not of my doing, but how is it that I'm here today? Well, I tell you it's not because I'm an exception, but because I'm a reflection of what happens when a citizenry in a community, in a commonwealth, rises up to protect the most vulnerable amongst us. I am that example of what happens when a young person gets their chance. Claire, Ruby, and John, they all had a secret. They still have that secret. They knew that acts of kindness creates bonds and connections amongst strangers. That was their secret. They were indeed lighthouses for me in a dark world. They gave me that hand forward. They offered a word of encouragement. They shaped this innate resolve that I had. And as a result, I was able to put down the anger that I had as a young boy because of the gifts of their love and connection. So it's because of those people and this community, because I am and have always been a son of New Bedford. What I've achieved in my life is because of the lessons that I saw here on the docks and in communities and in goodness. That's what I saw here. So I was always on a mission to kind of reflect, this community. And yet for all that I do, the greatest triumph of my life will always be my family. My wife, Tanya, who remains She remains as magical to me as she did when we were first walking down the street in Martha's Vineyard. You know, there are difficulties that we all encounter, but if you can get to a point in your life where you see a light, they make the struggles worth it. So if I had to travel that journey, that path, to come stand beside her, I'd do it all over again. It's not a step of the journey that I would trade. And it's not just Tanya, it's the three lights of our life, and Quinn, and Vaughn, and Kennedy. Quinn will be sending off to college in a few weeks. We're still trying to wrap our head around that. We just brought him home from the hospital a couple of days ago, or so it seems. And now we have to send him off into the world. And that's going to be tough on us. But that's the deal God makes with us when he brings children into our life. He says, I'm going to bring you the greatest gift you've ever known. And then you in turn have to send that gift off into the world. And so it's quite an honor to say that one of the best people you know is also your son. I tease Vaughn a lot because Vaughn should have been named Stephen Jr. Because when I see him, I really do see so much of me. I see his fearlessness, his protectiveness, his courage. And I see an eminently good person who is going to be a great man, not because of any title that he'll have, but because of the way in which he cares for others around him. There's such strength and resolve in him. And as I think about the young man that he is becoming, I am eminently proud of him. I've been asked as this process unfolds whether or not I will have the support of and the endorsement of a Kennedy. And they are quite shocked and amazed when I say that I already have the endorsement of a Kennedy. Our daughter Kennedy, though last in the birth order, came into the world and promptly staged a coup. Because little girls do that with their daddy's hearts. The three of them were arguing last night as to who is my favorite, and I was protesting that I love you all the same. And Quinn and Vaughn insist that Kennedy is my favorite. So that debate will rage on in the Pemberton home. But children, you are magic to me, and you've always been magic to me from the day that you arrived. You know, I think I learned here that family isn't just what you're born into, it's also who you find along the way. You know, for me, it came in places that I saw here and in people that I saw here. But there's a lot of other things that I learned growing up here in New Bedford. You know, this historic city that has its footprints in history, the center of equality and access and opportunity. And those lessons were instilled in me at a very, very young age. Ruby made sure that I would be faith-abiding. John talked to me all the time about the importance of character. And that too, I didn't know what it was, but he kept telling me that I had a lot of it. And so I believed him. This city, hard by the ocean, has value and has always had value and purpose and place that it is reflected in its citizens. So those lessons of commitment were indeed instilled in me and then cemented when I arrived at Boston College. And because it did, it sent me on this life's mission to create a more inclusive, more just society where everyone does indeed get their chance after all, because this is America and you should get your chance. And when you get that chance, you'll do something with that chance. I have. Many of my friends who I grew up here with have. And I learned probably most importantly at all, something that the current occupant in the White House does not seem to understand. That you cannot turn pain into more pain. You have a responsibility to create possibilities for others. That's the gift of being a citizen of this country. And I tried to live that as best I could, from opening doors to thousands of students as an admissions officer at UMass Dartmouth, then SMU, and then Boston College, starting a company focused on college access, trying to create more inclusive and accessible environments in the worlds of employment and healthcare and employee appreciation is because of the lessons that I learned here that are reflected in so many of you in the room. My life's always going to be dedicated to giving people the one thing that I know you need, which is just a chance. And that brings us to today. We are in a unique and urgent time in our society. Challenging times that challenge our history, who we are, and who we want to be. We seem to be threatened, and many of our citizens are threatened due to their race, their sexuality, their immigration standing, their zip code, their gender. And we're seeing the human toll of what happens when you don't have access to education. We're seeing what a lack of education does, the roadblocks to obtaining quality health care, the collateral damage of income inequality. It is all around us. And we are also witnessing a purposeful intention to turn back the clock to a more difficult time in America when so many did not get their chance. But I understand these challenges. I recognize them because I lived them. They were all around me. They created the cycle into which I had been born. But the challenge for me, for all of us, is what are we going to do when you see dreams that are deferred and denied? When you see people amongst you who are fighting for their own chance, what are we going to do? I've seen the human toll of policies that don't work, mandates that are ignored or unfunded, and people simply forgotten about. I've experienced the real impact of hopelessness. I know full well what happens when you're left in the wake of poverty, abandonment, and neglect. I would come to understand as life moved on for me that my parents were not bad people. They just had some bad things happen to them that they were not equipped to handle. There were societal forces that quite literally disintegrated their life. And they did not want the childhood for me that unfolded. They were battling income inequality. They were battling addiction. They were battling homelessness. They were battling things like gun violence. And it would ultimately cost them their life, and it would cost me parents. That inheritance is not the kind that you pass on. It's the kind that you try to break. And not just for yourself, but for generations to follow. I am the last Pemberton that will happen to. The cycle ends, and the fight is over for me. But now the question is, for whom else can I break that cycle? For whom else can all of us help break that cycle? There are some things that are not our fault, but they are our responsibility. And so it is with America too. This is our responsibility to seize back our democracy, to remind America of the strength of our institutions, and to be focused on one another. At this time, more than any other in recent history, we do need candidates with lived experiences, who have sat on the other side of things that do not work, who are, as a result of that experience, more urgent, unrelenting, unyielding, and unrequited in their belief that this can change for themselves, for their families, for their communities, and for generations still to come. I think the job description of a United States Senator has changed, and we have to redefine what that means together. And we especially have to do that when you have the wonderful opportunity to run for the role in the office of a United States Senator from Massachusetts. The expectation is high, and it is indeed different. So that's why I'm running for the United States Senate. You know, at a time when we have a president who wakes up each day focused on who he can hurt and who he can harm, rather than who he can heal and who he can help. And you see that reflected in attacks on congresswomen of color because they commit the great crime of disagreeing with him, to his destructive immigration policies that purposefully separate families. That is what we are wrestling with today. We need elected officials who can help restore trust and integrity to a society when we desperately need it. And in 2020, we have to send a powerful message to Donald Trump and the party that aids, abets, and protects him, that his America is not the America that we want for our children and our grandchildren. I'm going to be what I was as a young boy, unrelenting, determined, fighting for those who find themselves on the fringes, the student drowning in loan debt, the family that can't afford basic health care, the single mother having to choose between the job she loves and caring for the child that she needs, the immigrant family that is struggling just to find some semblance of civility and connection and trying to find it here in America, the woman being denied equal pay in a purposeful attempt to roll back reproductive rights, the previously incarcerated man who's trying to overcome his mistake and just wants a second chance, but is having a hard time finding a job, the small business owner struggling to get started or to make payroll, and for an electorate that is sick of the control that special interests and lobbyists and PAC money have on our politics, money that I want to say at the outset that I will reject. I'm running because we need to elect leaders who do more than just show up to vote, who do more than just show up in times of convenience or when they see a challenge coming. We need leaders who know firsthand what it is like to be one of those that Washington's forgotten. This will be a hard-fought battle. This will be a fight. But the fight is terrain with which I am very comfortable, and I am quite familiar. So I look forward to that fight. I'm not a conventional candidate, nor am I a traditional outsider, and that speaks to me. I like being in that place. I'm most comfortable in that place. And I know in quiet rooms that many of us are not invited into, where kind of the deals are made, the plotting actually begins. I'm going to hear that old refrain of not your time and not your turn, and that our focus should be elsewhere. I'm going to hear that the climb is too great, and I'm going to hear once again that I don't have a chance in the world. But I'm not the only one who's heard that. Some of you have heard that too, about a dream, an aspiration, a belief of a better world. But those voices aren't going to realize why we're running and why I'm running. I'm running because we cannot yield to the forces of hatred and division. We can't allow for a weakening of our institutions. I'm running because my 3 children need to see me. Your children need to see me, and your grandchildren need to see me. They need to see a life that reflects both the perils of America, but also her possibilities, because I am both those things. And I'm running because everyone in Massachusetts deserves a chance in the world. And so as we embark, my family and I, on this most unlikely journey, and it is unlikely, we ask, first of all, for your prayers of faith and kindness and goodness, because we need that. We ask for your support. And most importantly, we ask for your vote. Let's go make history, Massachusetts. Thank you.